Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, as always, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. Sergio Almécija. He is Senior Research Scientist in Biological Anthropology at the American Museum of Natural History, and today we're focusing on his edited book, Humans: Perspectives on Our Evolution from World Experts. So, Dr. Almecija, welcome to the show. It's a big pleasure to everyone.
Thank you, Ricardo, for having me here.
So you brought together this very interesting book about basically the opinions of several different people, experts, mostly anthropologists, but also people from other fields, as we're going to talk about, to hear more about their perspectives on certain big questions in human evolution. So, but tell us a little bit more about the history behind it. I mean, what is this book really about? Why did you decide to write it? What motivated you, basically?
Um, I think it was a constellation of different things, not just one. But I guess one of the first things that kind of got me thinking about this was just making a book, not this book. Just
Yeah.
I was at the time a professor in a university in Washington, and I was teaching among other courses primate evolution, human evolution, and like it's really hard to have like a one book where you can have everything, right? And they're like few books, they're very good books, but always back me that every author has, of course, their own like views on how everything happened, right? And I didn't want to kind of just give one-sided view of the state of the art in a field of any field of evolution in general, but human evolution particularly is so much
Yeah.
we have so much personal investment on it, right? That every 2 weeks is some news, this fossil changes everything, and so on. So I really was like struggling to like have one source, so like to use as the main material for my courses, for my teaching. So basically, I kind of like didn't follow any book and was just trying to like provide everything that was in the primary literature, right? But it was kind of too much, for like just like an introductory course to human evolution. So I kept thinking like I should come out with some sort of book that I can have everything there in an interesting way.
Yeah.
And I was gonna write my own book about it, but then kind of like the idea just crossed my mind, like why don't just like it would be so cool to have a place where it's just like a some sort of like mm, encyclopedia where you can look for every different people that are very well known in the field from different aspects, from fossils to geology to morphology to behavior, and kind of like just introduce them so people know who they are, what they work on, and then just ask them the same questions, that and just that let them speak by themselves. So that on the one hand, they would provide like a very wide perspective of how things, like what the ideas are about human evolution.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it would highlight the problem that I was having, that it's not one story of human evolution. I don't know that's a problem or not, but clearly it's like everyone has a different story. And that to me was important to remark that. So that's how the idea emerged. And then kind of like I started contacting some of my close colleagues about it. And, like over, like I was in the field and I was like coming up with ideas, and they had to, what questions should I ask them and why? And I have like a little experiment test test group, and usually most of them were like very senior people in the field, because they are like kind of my personal heroes and sheroes, So, and because I was in a good position basically to make this something like this happen, because I made most of the people in the book, not everyone, but most of them I actually have known them for years. I have even worked with some of them. So I was thinking I could something like that could happen, and I probably can make it happen. So I just kind of went ahead with it. But it was kind of an experiment. It was an experiment that I didn't know what was going to happen, and in that being a very interesting book, but could had never happened to.
By the way, some of them I've already had on the show also. So
What's that?
some of the people you've basically interviewed for the book, I've also had on the show as guests. So
I know. Because they're very interesting people, or they are worth knowing and listening
yeah.
to.
Yeah. And by the way, you mentioned there that you basically ask the same set of questions to all of the people you interviewed for the book. How did you arrive at that set of questions, and why do you think they are so illuminating?
So, I mean, they could have been, of course, other questions, and actually, some of them after the fact have suggested to me like, "Oh, it would have been so nice that you have asked these other questions as well," you know. And but it was just like, well, this is what we have now, and basically, these questions were set up to be some sort of blank canvas for them to
Yeah.
talk about what they wanted to talk to. And even though I sent to everyone the same set of 10 questions, I didn't ask them to answer all of them. I asked
Yeah.
because they're kind of they're like some are more like personal like about their origins, their background. Others are more about the meat of what they work on and what they think is interesting. And then it's a set of them that is more a kind of
Yeah.
philosophical question. So different people, I told them like you don't have to answer them all, just answer the ones that you feel like you want to answer, and you can use your own words and your own length. You know, there are some people who answer with one word, people who answer with a one sentence, people who answer with a one page. No, and actually, many people in the book have told me that they were surprised to read the answers of the others because they know them and they clearly like you can kind of like the personality of every person is kind of reflected in the way they answer because it's just the style, the how much they talk, you
Yeah.
know. And I didn't edit any of that. We just like I promised them we would only edit for like style, you know, but not change anything else. So because we wanted this book to kind of reflect everyone's ideas and personality. It's like it feels like you kind of know a little bit the person in person, even though you might not. So I
And
know that answer your question, or you want something more specific about the each of the questions.
yeah, I mean, yeah, perhaps we can get into a few of them. So, what perhaps are some of the questions that you would highlight there?
Um, um, I mean, they're all these 10 were like kind of a selection already of many, right? But let me just maybe I can just do a very short summary of each of them, and some I can
Yeah,
explain a little more. But basically,
sure.
it was 10 questions plus a bonus question. And the three first questions were kind of more like an icebreaker.
Yeah,
It's a way to introduce so they can talk about themselves, their background, and you know, the first question, for example, is about they can talk about their beginnings. They can describe the moment in their lives in which they kind of things started for them in their career or what they
yeah,
work on.
right.
And the second question is called game changer. It's basically if there is any particular study or book or discovery that it changed everything for them, the way they think, the way they look at what they do. And that was an interesting outcome of that compilation of answers to that question is that there is now a section at the end of the book which is recommended readings, which basically is just a compilation of the papers and books that the experts like responded that like they thought they were game changing studies or work.
Yeah,
And many of them are the same. They gave the same. Many of them like pointed to same studies, same books. So we thought it was worthwhile to have just those all them compiled at the end of the book. It's like it is a good resource.
yeah,
The third question was something just it was about if they think it's something amazing about human evolution, something that blows their mind. I was just also part of the breaking the ice about if there's something that really strikes them, you know.
yeah,
And you will have answers from like, it amazes me that humans have gotten so far, you know, because we're so stupid. Or other people would answer like, you know, like they're amazed about particular aspects of like human evolution, you know, as compared to other animals. So it goes all over depending on the personality of the personality of the expert in that case, no? And then
right.
what I call the core questions, they're designed to get more to the meat of like what they work on, why they think is interesting, but in a kind of in a interesting, fun, engaging way, right? So, for example, my favorite question in that section is the time travel question, which basically I asked them like, if you had like a one-shot round trip in a time machine, to which specific time and place would you go, past or future, and why? And that's basically a question. It's just a way. It's an interesting way to ask them, like, why do you like if someone is working about studying how Lucy Australopithecus afarensis was walking, they probably would. Their answer usually is, "Oh, I would travel 3 million years ago to Ethiopia to this particular site in Hadar and like have some sort of kinematic like portable lab to study like the gait of these species to test if what I've been like thinking for the last 20 years is real or not. But that's like an entryway to like the study of kinematics in living, the study of motion in living species. How can we infer the motion in fossil species? Why is that important, and so on, right?
Yeah.
Another question in that section of the core questions is driving factors, which basically it was asking like what happened, what's the driving factors that made an ape evolve into a human at some point, right? And this is just like is a different way to ask like why are they humans? Why are we here? What happened, evolutionarily speaking? And it was interesting because there were answers all over the place. From like this is impossible to know, from the typical answer, oh, because we become biped and we became biped because the environment changed, it was more open. It's all you can see all the views about what we different people think like jump started human evolution, and it's clear from the answers that there's not one answer. The next question in this section was like future evolution, and then just like basically what do you think will be shaping human evolution in the future and different times in the future. And it's just a way to ask like, are humans still evolving? And if so, how are they evolving? What do you think are the next steps in our evolution? And you have all over, that some people think like, like we're gonna be extinct soon. Other people think that there's no way to know, too much contingency. Other people provide very specific answers about how exactly we're gonna look a million years from now. Very interesting.
Yeah.
The next question here was evolutionary lessons, which basically was asked. This was very important for me because I was just, after 20 plus years working on this field, I find it very interesting, but I always wonder, is this actually, besides interesting, is it useful? Can we learn something that could be practical for our daily life? And again, you have answers from all over. Like some people would answer, I don't think this is useful, but like any like elementary science is very interesting. It's worth studying just for the sake of studying it. Other people will actually say, no, this could have like very important implications for our daily life to provide specific examples. I don't know, you want to go into this now or later, but like, one example was like one of the experts, a professor in Japan, was saying that the accident after the tsunami in the Fukushima power plant in 2011 could have been much worse if the people who built the power station had listened to the scientists who were like advising them to put the power backups in higher grounds, because it was historically known based on geological studies that tsunamis have reached that region before. So, but they didn't pay attention to that, so they put them in lower ground, and they were affected as well. So it was a horrible accident after the other accident. And then the last questions that I asked were more kind of in the philosophical side. One was just, are humans special? And again, you have all over. It was kind of like a way to trigger some reactions, and it did trigger some reactions because some people would be like, "Of course we're special. We have language. We talk to each other. We make books like this. We ask weird questions about our evolution. Nothing else does this. Of course we're special." Other people would go the other extreme and be like, "Every species by definition is special. That's the definition of a species. We're just as special as being a human as an elephant is special as being an elephant, right?" And then there's everything in between, right? So it's very interesting because it really gathers like how wide the perspectives are. As many as people in the book, and probably more, and this is just a selection. Next question was religion and spirituality. Like basically, I was asking the experts if they think that they're compatible with having a scientific view of the world, in studying with the study of evolution or human evolution specifically. Are these views compatible or not? Again, you have all over, So I thought that no one would answer. Many scientists would try to not answer this question, but I was really surprised that many actually did respond to this question, and it went from not compatible whatsoever to fully compatible. I don't see the problem because one addresses the whole things happen, the other addresses the why things happens. One is about morality, the other is about this. And it's very interesting that you can see a clear divide between researchers in the US and outside the US in this view. Then the last question was kind of meant more for people interested in the field of human evolution, whether they are specific students or young researchers or just people who are interested. Like, what advice would they give to people interested? They want to know more about it. But I think it's going to be a useful resource for students specifically because they provide advice that help them like go where they are today, you know, and like it's I think could be a good resource, the answer to that question. I think I was not expecting a lot from that, but actually many people kind of focus on giving like good advice to it. And then the bonus question I asked was like basically who would you ask these questions to, living or alive, i.e. or dead, right? And
Yeah.
this is very interesting as well because people pointed from classic philosophers to like someone in the future who would know all these answers already, what they would think, other people suggested other experts like today that was a good resource for me to actually then reach those and invited them to bring the book. So those are the questions.
So you also divide the book into several different parts. I mean, because you of course interview different experts, and some of them are more focused on some particular periods in our evolution, and of course others are from different areas. Even some of them are not anthropologists, but you start with the people who study the antecedents of human evolution. I would like to ask you here, what exactly are the antecedents of human evolution? I mean, what kinds of experts are studying this topic?
So basically, those are people who are focusing their efforts in studying what happened before human evolution. So how do you define before human evolution? That's an interesting question on its own. But basically, it's before the lineage who basically was clearly evolving into us today even originated. That's people who studied primate evolution in general or ape evolution in general before like the human lineage originated from people who just have study like older like origins of mammals even because I think that it was a way to highlight that perspective is equally like it's very hard to define a concrete like section of time that is human evolution because I find it very limiting because many researchers who work in human evolution there are some that only look at modern humans and compare them with a chimpanzee because chimpanzees are our closest living relatives today, right? And they kind of like that's human evolution. Like whatever is different from us and chimps, that's what is changed on our lineage. That's what's happened in human evolution, right? And I think it's very limiting because that's basically assuming many things. One of them, the biggest assumption here is that chimpanzees have never evolved, right?
Yeah.
Like they're just some sort of a static ancestor, and it's like humans and chimpanzees have evolved from a common ancestor that lived around 6 million years ago. But that ancestor also like evolved from an ancestor shared with gorillas that live around 10 million years ago. And then
Yes.
we all share a primate ancestor, at some point more than 60 million years ago. So, like when do you decide what is, everything that happened before is essential for what happened later. It's like a continuum, right? Like you could argue that human evolution is just evolution. Like we're just one of the outcomes of a larger process with millions of species over millions of years. So like it's hard to. So I thought that I would be interested to bring that into the book, not just ask questions to experts that work in specifically human evolution and fossils that clearly are human, but people who are looking at the broader picture from things that happened before, or even other groups that are parallel to us today, just to like basically enrich the bigger picture.
Right. And this period in our evolution is very interesting because it brings together primatologists and paleoanthropologists. And I mean, how do you look at the relationship specifically between primatology and paleoanthropology? Because as far as I understand it, I've talked, for example, with primatologists who have a background in biology and then they specialized in the study of primates. But there are also anthropologists, specifically paleoanthropologists and sometimes biological anthropologists, who themselves study not only hominins but also other primates, particularly usually the great apes. So how do you look at the relationship there between those two different kinds of experts?
So, for example, people ask me, what do you study? I usually don't say I study human evolution. I say I study ape and human evolution.
Yeah.
And that's kind of linking back to what I just said, that, we our closest living relatives are the great apes, chimpanzees, then gorillas, then orangutans. And there is just no way to understand, like, there is anyone who studies evolutionary biologist would not, let's study the evolution of, let's say, of in dinosaurs. They don't look at one. I study the evolution of T-Rex.
Yeah.
They look at the evolution of the group that includes T-Rex. Only by comparing, you can know what is special or not special or common in the
Yeah.
particular group of interest or species of interest, right? If you're interested in human evolution, it's impossible to understand what's special in humans if we don't compare with the other things that are out there, especially the ones that are closely related to us, like the great apes. So that's why it's kind of essential, like and in the case like paleoanthropology and primatology, like there is this assumption that, oh, we can kind of look at living great apes, especially chimpanzees, as some sort of, it's kind of looking at our past, right? It's like they are similar to our ancestors. So if a chimpanzee can use tools, probably our ancestor was using tools. If a chimpanzee is this kind of smart, they don't have developed language, but they have like some, they communicate in this other way. But so we can infer that our ancestor was probably also doing that. So that's why they are linked, because without comparing, it's impossible to know what is this thing in human evolution. When you find a fossil that goes somewhere in the human lineage, and usually that's defined based on, oh, it was walking bipedally. Oh, it was walking bipedally because it has this morphology that is more human than chimpanzee. So you cannot know that if you don't compare to know where the fossil falls in the, is this bone, this femur of Lucy, the Australopithecus reference, is it closer to a human or is it closer to a chimpanzee, or is it in between, or is it in between but closer to one and the other? It's impossible to know without comparing. So that's why comparisons are important,
Yeah.
and that they always go together. The difference, I think, it's for many paleoanthropologists, living primates, particularly great apes, in particular chimpanzees within the great apes, that's the end of the story. Like the great apes to them are interesting just as this comparative thing, like something to compare their fossils with, to know like how primitive or modern their fossil is, right? And that's fine. Like I think kind of I started like that back in the day, but like then it kind of grew. It grew me the curiosity about understanding also the evolution of the apes, because then I realized that, well, there are also fossil apes out there, and they don't look like the living apes. So that means that living great apes are also evolved from something. And that something is probably closer to our ancestor than any living ape today. So that's what I kind of like now is more and more people are, okay, it is essential to understand human evolution within the broader perspective of primate evolution.
So, I mean, there's not a strict division between primatologists and paleoanthropologists, right?
There is, in the sense that some like primatologists are usually, most of the time they don't look at fossils. Most of the time they look at living primates, their
Okay.
biology, their behavior, their genetics, and so on. Paleoanthropologists are more looking at the fossil record, archaeological record, and then look at living primates as kind of like their comparative like toolbox to understand, like to
Yeah.
contextualize what they're finding in the fossil record. But there are some there are some researchers which are kind of have a foot in each of them. So there are like some that study fossils, and then they go to the field and study primates because they feel like they are interesting on their own as a field of study, but they help them better contextualize what they find in the fossil record. And there are many like that, but it's a minority. Usually, in this day and age, everyone is so specialized that usually like anthropologists look at fossils, primatologists look at living primates. But there are some colleagues, for example, in the book that it was hard to put them in one section or another of the book because they
Yeah.
kind of do everything. They do archaeology and then they look for fossils and then they also go and study chimpanzee behaviors. It's just hard. It was a decision kind of like the edit the I was the editor of the book, but it was like the editor and the publishing company, Columbia University Press in this case, and they thought that it would be easier to subdivide the book in sections. So we need to come up with a way to separate the different experts in different areas. And we did the best that we could, but there are some colleagues that kind of like could have been in all the sections almost.
Yeah. No, no, I've had the same experience on the show interviewing some primatologists and some paleoanthropologists because I have an anthropology and a primatology playlist on my channel, and sometimes it's very hard to choose if I
I
should put
know.
someone on the primatology or the anthropology playlist, and usually I end up putting them in both. So,
I think that's the right decision, honestly, because they do both. They're interested to both in the both contexts. They probably
yeah.
bring also broader perspectives into each of them individually.
Yeah. And so another kind of experts that you interview for the book are the ones that are focused mostly on the early stages of what you call the human career in the book. But this leads us to one of the, I would imagine, biggest questions in anthropology. That is, when did we become human exactly? I mean, there are, of course, several different ways we could approach the question. We could even tackle it from a philosophical perspective. But since we're talking about anthropology here, what does it mean to be human in anthropology?
As you said, there's not a clear answer. I can give you like some perspectives on it
Yeah.
from different people. So basically, it's again like we humans. I think I would start with the philosophy here, which is we
Yeah.
humans like to tag everything. Everything has to have a name. Everything has to be in a category. But the reality is that the real world doesn't have categories. Everything is a continuum, right? And so people is been trying to understand what is human evolution, when does human evolution start, and so I would start by saying like we are Homo sapiens, and basically the genus Homo is by definition the human genus. So before there are other hominins, so they are in the human lineage, but they're closer to us than to any living other species, like Australopithecus, Paranthropus, Aurorin, Ardipithecus, Sahelanthropus. There are so many now, but they're not within the genus Homo. Genus Homo, Homo sapiens, there are like fewer species. No, there are more and more recently, right? Right, like there's Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, there's Homo naledi, Homo habilis, Homo ludocensis. There's just so many species now that this is again. I think we're in a period of time in which everyone is finding a new fossil and making a new species of the genus Homo within the genus Homo, and then 10 years from now, someone is going to revise the whole evidence again and come out with only three species, and then it's going to come out again. These are cycles that happen, but by definition, the human genus is Homo. So everything that is inside the genus Homo would basically start. The oldest fossils that we have of the genus Homo are like around 2.6, 2.7, maybe 2.8, mandible, 2.8 years from Ethiopia. But that's all we know. Like most of what we know of Homo, it's a little 2.5, 2, and later on. And actually, these first fossils that are within the genus Homo, which are basically Homo habilis and related forms of Homo habilis, it's been a debate over like since the 90s and still alive today, in which like should we even put these in the genus Homo because they really look so primitive that maybe they should be in the genus Australopithecus, right? That like existed before. And Australopithecus are known to have like basically in general They have features in the skeleton that look more kind of ape-like. Some features are more human-like, homo-like. Others are more like ape-like, more like not exactly like a chimpanzee, but some are more chimpanzee-like. Others are more like a gorilla. Others are more like an orangutan. Others are like other fossil apes that we don't have anything alive today. But clearly they were different. Starting at 2 million years when we have Homo erectus, and Homo erectus is like, even though that you can see still weird things, like as compared to us, we will be the weird to them, but like to us, they are weird in the face. They still have like thick eyebrows and smaller like brain case and like big faces. But basically, from the distance, you think it's a human like me. He already has neck down. He has a body like us. Like they were like very like even bigger than us. Some fossils are even bigger than humans alive today. Like very tall. They were probably like walking bipedally, like we walk, running, hunting.
Yeah.
They're basically from the distance, they're like us. So some people would argue that that's the beginning of what it means to be a human, but other people, so around 2 million years ago, and also around that time is when before we have already stone tools. Like older stone tools are now like 3 million years old, but they're very like rudimentary. They're like just big rocks, that's hard to. But started 2 million years or something like that, or slightly later, like with Homo erectus, we start having these like nice like the hand axes that have like nice symmetry to them, and clearly like that technology shows that something else is happening up here, like and so some people would argue that some kind of proto language, like modern language, but like some language was at play then, because it's been there experiments showing that when you're trying to teach someone else to do something, it's just by looking at the other doing it is not as much, doesn't work as well as showing and explaining. And you hold this like this, and then you have to do it like that, because if not, this is gonna happen. So there's like indirect evidence, of course, we don't know they were talking, but this indirect evidence that there was some sort of more advanced communication already around 2 million years ago. So is that the beginning of being a human? Other people argue that not yet, that it really was not until around 70,000, 50,000 years ago, so much, much later. Not millions of years, not hundreds of thousands of years, just thousands of years. Because around that time, this 50,000 years ago, is when you start seeing everywhere, like starting to see in different places, paintings, personal ornaments, things that clearly had conceptual meaning, things that people can give to each other as presents. There's symbolism. Is what people call this augmented reality. It is like this interior world that we have today that is made out of concepts. And that basically shows that this is like a very, very well developed, like full-fledged modern human language. And that really didn't start before 50,000 years ago. So again, things is a continuum. Probably things happen like gradually, slowly, which is like things took over after around 50,000 with the full-fledged language and culture. So, but we know that things, fossils of humans that basically look already like modern Homo sapiens were already around 200,000 years ago in Africa. So, and those
Right.
are currently situated in the Homo sapiens group. Like fossils from Omo Valley in Ethiopia, they are considered Homo sapiens, and they are 200,000 years old. So, but the modern behavior doesn't seem to appear until later. So that's why people talk about anatomically modern humans versus modern human behavior. And then it's hard to tell. It seems that one came after the other. I have colleagues that work in older sites in Africa, 300,000-year-old sites, and they found traces of ochre. That meaning that probably these humans were like using it to paint themselves, to like signal the others. Things like I belong to this group, you belong to that group. So language was clearly some there, and the beginnings of modern behaviors were there much earlier. But so when this is kind of a philosophical question at this point, when do you put the mark like this is a modern human? I don't know. It depends. How do you consider what do you consider to be a modern human? And based on anatomy, based on behavior.
Right. And so earlier I've asked you about primatology and its relationship to anthropology, but you also interview experts from other fields, like, for example, medicine, psychology, philosophy. How do you think these other disciplines can contribute to an understanding of what humans are?
But I think it's precisely based on the last answer I gave you. Like there, at some point, we can, as scientists, we can like find things, study things, quantify things. But then at some point, there is a factor that is not that, is more kind of at some point, it's just purely semantics, purely philosophical. Like, okay, now how do you, based on all this evidence, because I have colleagues that, the colleagues that found the ochre in Africa 300,000 years ago, they say this is the beginning of humanity. The colleagues who found the cave paintings 50,000 years ago, they say, no, this is the beginning of humanity. So how do you, who is going to decide this? I think having a kind of external views to people who are just in the trenches of paleontology itself, anthropology, maybe can provide some sort of perspective. When you are, let's say, like this is like people who study like Zen, for example, they would say if you are inside a washing machine tumbling around, it's hard. It's probably going to be hard for you to understand what's happening. But if you're outside looking from the distance, the thing you might have a better perspective of what's happening around you at that moment. So the idea was kind of like that, like, okay, people who are clearly interested in understanding human nature, human evolution, but they are not working specifically with the fossil record or archaeological record. How they see things. Are they seeing things the same way that we are seeing them or not? And that really, like, it was very eye-opening for me because one of the people in the book, one of the humans in the book, that was the name of the book kind of was playing with this is about humans and human evolution, but also it's kind of showcasing real humans. It's kind of a behind the scenes view of the field and the people behind it, right? But one of them in this section is more like the philosophical section. Is her name is Nisia Landau, and she's an anthropologist, right? But she's a peculiar anthropologist because she's also an artist, and her dissertation actually she was interested both in the both the science of human evolution, but also the humanistic part of human evolution. What is being written about it, how is being written about it, and so on. And by kind of by accident, she found out that many of the narratives of human evolution since Darwin until these days, like they follow a narrative. Like and not just human evolution, but science in general. Her argument is that humans, based on our language, is just kind of there's no other way around it. Like when we communicate using human language, it's always a narrative. It's always a subject, a predicate, and so on. And then it seems that it's just the way we communicate information, and when we do so, we tend to do it in a way that the more interesting is communicated in the form of a tale is like more interesting for the other person. Is probably likely to remember. So this is happening at some point. This is happening mostly unconsciously. But her argument was that since the first narratives about human evolution, the rest of researchers basically are kind of fitting their discoveries into pre-existing narratives and just kind of tweaking them a little bit. And then she was actually mapping, like there is like one of the people who came out with this theory is Joseph Campbell, who is an anthropologist in New York, and actually like his research on that is what inspired George Lucas to write Star Wars. The way it was written is the hero's tale.
Yeah.
Basically, what Campbell found out is that, like across cultures, like many cultures who have in different times in history, in different continents, cultures that never met each other. So it's not like they copied the other. They came out with myths and stories and religions that kind of follow the same narrative structure of the hero who leaves, their like homeland and they encounter different problems, and then a mentor shows up and helps, and then at the end of the story is transformed into something bigger that comes back home and helps the people around them. So he found out that kind of archetype of the hero's journey tale It's kind of it repeats over and over again in different cultures, in different
Yep.
myths, in different religions. And what Lisa Landau found out is that this also happens in science. When people describe the results of their own studies, even there's scientific studies with based on scientific data analysis, still the way they communicate their discussion, their conclusions, is always in a narrative style that sometimes also feed that hero's journey tale, and it seems that her argument is that this is just a way in which this is the way in which the human psyche works, and it's hard to escape from it, but we need to be aware of it, so when we communicate our like results as scientists, we do it in a way that is not just a tale, that it's okay, it has the shape of a narrative, but it's communicating novel information, not just building pre-existing tales, right? So this is an interesting perspective. I thought, for example, that only you could only bring into the picture if you talk to people outside the specific field of like the regular science.
And so you interviewed all these variety of experts, asking them what it means to be human, asking them questions about human evolution. So, looking back at that, what would you say are perhaps some of the most disputed questions? That is, the
Mm.
aspects where, looking at that variety of experts, you would say they disagree the most on?
Oh, there are many of them, but I guess I would say um, one of them is the one I mentioned about, is it useful to study human evolution from a practical perspective, or it's just interesting?
Yeah.
Like, it went like from like, no, this is purely like, in the same way that watching a movie is not useful for anyone's life, but it's interesting and entertaining. But this is the same, and it's based on real things that actually happen. So it's even more, and it's about us. So it's therefore very interesting for everyone, and someone has to do it. Other people would actually argue it's interesting, but it also has practical issues, no? Like the example of the Fukushima station, but there are other people who study more in the medicine world, for example, like what we mentioned, that it's interesting to understand human evolution because it seems that physiologically, for example, we are adapted to not eat almost sugar or fats, right? And that's why most of the obesity pandemic in the world is because most diets now are rich in the things that we are able to eat very little. So basically, and this happens also in other animals, like like the orangutans in the field, in their habitats, there are sometimes there are months or years in which there's almost no food to eat, no fruit, and they're literally chewing on the bark of the tree because there's nothing to eat. So they are adapted to, like, when there is something that has sugars and fats, which has a lot of energy, their bodies are adapted over millions of years to like suck it up in the forms of fat, so they can then survive for long periods of time with no food or very little food or low quality food. It seems that something like that happened in the human lineage, but now we're just eating the things that we're not to eat all the time, and that is causing us a lot of problems. Then one could argue, oh, is that really useful to know? Because we know anyways that it's bad for us, so let's just don't eat it. Why it's important to know that the evolutionary like explanation of why this is the way it is.
Yep.
This is a big discussion. So again, some people argue that you can find having the evolutionary perspective can help you find better solutions. Others think that it's interesting, but it's not going to change anything. Another big discussion was about what started human evolution, right? Like some expert would say it's impossible to know. It probably was something, a very complex process with different things interacting with other things, and it's hard to tell exactly what is the one thing that jump started human evolution. Others provide very clear, specific ideas. No, what happened is that the environment changed, it was open, so we had to come down the trees and become biped, and as a byproduct, our hands were free from locomotion, therefore we started using them for making tools, and that made us smarter, and blah, 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 blah. So very opposite views. The same for the future question. Like some people would argue that it's impossible to know what's going to happen in the future because everything is there's so much contingency. We don't know if a meteorite is going to come next year and kill everyone. We don't know climate change, what's going to happen 50 years down the road. Others would argue that we're for sure going to be extinct in 100 years from now. Others provide like very specific perspective about this is exactly how humans are going to look 100,000 years from now. This is exactly how humans are going to look a million years from now. These are the reasons, right? So that was very shocking to me as well. And then, of course, the one about religion and spirituality, that you have this big divide, especially from folks in the US and outside the US. Because in the US, like there are some exceptions, but the majority is the place in which most researchers would, if they answer the question, that they're like not compatible. It's basically, if you believe in religion and spirituality, you are not a scientist, And outside the US, there are all kinds of views, especially there's some colleagues from Asia that they have like Buddhist backgrounds, and to them religion, they always like feel like animals are like kind of equal to humans, and they just kind of feel that one thing kind of complements the other, and they actually feel that ignoring um, teachings that could come from the spiritual world could kind of like blindside us in terms of science. Maybe we're not studying something because we think, oh, this is just some sort of like juju mambo jumbo. Let's ignore this. And some people are like, well, maybe there's some science behind that. Let's actually look into it and see what's happening. So that question clearly was a big divide. And then, but I guess I know if I had to highlight the one,
So
I
let
think,
me ask you about
okay.
one specific question, and please tell me if this is also something that people actually also disagree a lot on. So, what about specifically how people, different kinds of experts, anthropologists specifically, but also others, how they look at how universal is our human behavior and psychology? I mean, in terms of if you look cross-culturally, human behavior and psychology varies a lot, or if we have really a big common human nature and our psychology is mostly universal. I mean, did you find lots of disagreement there or not?
Well, I guess some of that came out in the answers to the question about whether or not humans are special. And the answer were not about it's I don't think it was any single answer that kind of doubted that humans as a whole are kind of like not different from each other.
Okay.
Like I think is the discussion is about whether the human uniqueness is so unique or is like a degree of, so humans versus apes, for example, or other animals are like the difference that we have are like a matter of degree, or there's like a matter of quality. So it's like any human behavior today, you can see some of it in a chimpanzee today. It's just expressed there, just as smart, the same kind of capacity that we have, but just to a lesser degree. Or there's something clearly distinctive. It's a clear cut between being a human and not being a human. That was like kind of highly debated among the different experts. But no one doubted that humans, they're like, it seemed to me that the implication of their answer is that they don't consider that there is something different among humans, that they consider all humans to have a very common psyche, and there's some commonalities in human nature. And one of them is, for example, this thing about human language and the way we structure communication in the form of a narrative that dictates kind of the way that we think. I don't like everyone. I think agrees that basically it's one human nature, and there would very few exceptions even in terms of language. But the big debate is about whether or not is a clear cut with other animals or not.
And looking at the current state, the state of the art, let's say, of our understanding of human evolution, what would you say are the biggest known unknowns?
I mean, known unknowns. I mean, there are various of that. One big debate today is there are many, but one big debate today is about the starting point of human evolution. For example, like there is everyone since the molecular revolution that started in the 60s and then 70s. It was kind of after the 90s. 99% of the researchers agree that chimpanzees are the living closest relative to humans. Before that, just looking at the anatomy, the morphology, it was kind of like a surprise because you would assume that a chimpanzee is closer to a gorilla than to
Yeah.
us. So that kind of blew everyone's mind at the time. Um, and then since then, it's been kind of a and still ongoing debate about, okay, so then so who was the ancestor from which chimpanzees and humans evolved? Was it like a chimpanzee or was it like something else? And that's still like a big unknown. And you can see just looking at the literature that some people just assume that we were from something like a chimpanzee. Other people assume that we were from something completely different from a chimpanzee. Other people think that some features of chimpanzees were an ancestor, but others were not. So that's still like kind of, if you ask different people, they would tell you that's not an unknown to me. I know exactly the answer. But I would suggest that just looking at in general the literature and how disparate the assumptions are in that sense is not a clear consensus about how the ancestor of chimpanzees and humans was. And that's important because it's basically will be the
Yeah.
starting point of human evolution, but also the starting point of chimpanzee evolution. And one of the big unknowns today, that which is like kind of mind blowing for many people, is to me too, even though I work on this, is that we don't have fossil chimpanzees. We don't have fossil gorillas. Some people argue we don't even have fossil orangutans. It's like, how is it possible that there are like hundreds of fossils of the human lineage, or Africa, Europe, Asia, but there are no fossil chimpanzees? I mean, there are like few teeth that are like just few thousand years old, not like there are no million years old. There's not a fossil record of chimpanzees. There's no fossil record of gorillas and so on. It's kind of like, it's like, what happened? This is still kind of, what the hell happened? You know? Um, it's a big mystery, and that's important because if we don't know, if we don't have these fossils, we cannot understand the evolution.
Yeah.
And if we don't understand the evolution, we cannot actually test if the ancestor of them and us was like them or was like something else. Um, and then another unknown relating to that is that in general, we know very little about the fossil record of humans in Africa. We think we know a lot because there are many fossils, especially from Eastern Africa and Southern Africa. But like Africa is giant, and like we know that they're we're all over. Just we don't have it. We know because like there are a few outliers. Like there are like, sites in Central Northern Africa in Chad where we found besides the fossils of Sahelanthropus, one of a possible early hominin of 7 million years. I'm not agree it's a hominin, but it's a different story. Do we have Australopithecus fossils there, older than 3 million years? We also have very bizarre fossil ape in Namibia, western like southern Africa. So, but they were kind of accidental findings, but they show you that the picture is way more complex than what we think we know what happened based on what we found. But what we found is not representative of what was there. And I think this is kind of it's strange because this is known, but people kind of don't acknowledge it that we have this limitation. There's kind of we don't talk about it because it makes it even more complicated, you know. And then still another big discussion today is all this like we know all this the new genomic studies showing that it was all this hybridization between humans and other species of humans until very recently. But some of them we don't even have like clear fossils that go with. We only know that something different was there based on the genes, but what was it? Still kind of debated. Even like a big unknown and highly debated thing is what going back to a previous answer question is about this uniqueness of modern humans, Homo sapiens, our capacity for language and abstractions and conceptual world, basically building. Is that unique of Homo sapiens, or there were other human species also capable of that? So some argue that only modern humans, only Homo sapiens has ever done. All the other variety of humans that lived before, not like us, and that's why they are not here anymore. But for example, like even Neanderthals that we coexisted in Europe for like 10,000 plus years, like some people argue that they didn't have a culture like a modern human culture, and they just didn't. That's why we were able to basically like I don't know, kill them all or drive them to extinction, or it's not clear exactly what happened with the Neanderthals. It's still a big unknown. Very, very debated how they become extinct when they have been in Europe for so long. But some ideas are like, well, they didn't have this sophisticated mind conceptual system that we have. But
Yeah.
there are other like there is like a cave in France, 200,000 year old, like Brunekel cave, and they're like very complex constructions inside the cave with the stalactites and stalagmites, circles, and that was a Neanderthal cave. So clearly they was something going on there. They're like some limited, they were making their own clothes, some argue they would bury their dead. So it's interesting that Neanderthals were kind of have a little bit of what we have, but it's not clear exactly to what degree. But now also we know that they were interbreeding with humans, with with Homo sapiens. So I mean, it's hard to believe that they were like mixing up with each other without sharing also like culture and knowledge, right? So that's still it's kind of very intriguing and very big unknown of what was happening at that time. And it was something so recent, relatively speaking.
Right. So I have then one final question for you, and you even mentioned earlier when I asked you about the questions that the experts in the book disagreed the most on. You mentioned the religious or spiritual question. I mean, if the scientific perspective is compatible with that. So I would like to hear your own thoughts on that. Do you think that a scientific perspective on humans is actually compatible with religious or spiritual views of humans or not?
I think spiritual and religious like cult, behaviors are just part of the human cultural repertoire. And so some experts in the book have pointed this out that it's worth studying them as any other aspect of being a human.
Yeah.
Because like me personally, I think that religions are like there are some commonalities among different religions, as other people have noticed, and similar teachings. Another thing is how humans have over the years, centuries, used religious books for their own convenience.
Yeah.
That's a different story. But religion itself, I think it's like I think it's been selected, right? Is a way to have a set of rules of what is good behavior or considered good behavior when they were written. Maybe they should have been updated with it later on. Maybe they didn't, but like they seem to have commonalities that might have been selected. So it's just I think it's just they're part of human behavior and they can be studied from an evolutionary viewpoint. And in terms of spirituality, I think it's a broader question because to me it means like what do you mean? You can ask different people what is spirituality for you, and like like for example, I don't believe that there is like some sort of like old man with a white beard sitting on top of a cloud looking at us. I don't. But I think that there are things that we still don't understand exactly how they work, and they've been like different spiritual views developed over the centuries about to explain them that might be based on nothing, but might be some true on them that just need more like scientific attention. And maybe things that we think are some sort of spiritual, meaningless things, like 100 years from now, it will be a basis of it. So, as someone has pointed out before, I think like a scientist with an open mind should consider everything and not just like discard things because that's kind of a way to narrow, the how much reality you can kind of perceive and study.
Okay, great. So the book is again Humans Perspectives on Our Evolution from World Experts. I'm leaving a link to it in the description box of the interview. And Dr. Almécija, just before we go, would you like to tell people, apart from the book, where they can find you on the internet?
Well, my name is not very common, so they just Google me. They will come out with my webpage, which is just my name.com. And there I have like links to my research and other things I work on. So everything can be found there.
Great. So thank you so much again for taking the time to come on the show. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise, Ricardo.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you liked it, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights, Learning and Development Done Differently. Check their website at enlights.com and also please consider supporting the show on Patreon or PayPal. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters, Per Ergo Larsen, Jerry Mullerens, Frederick Sunda, Bernardo Seixas, Olaf Alex, Adam Kessel, Matthew Whittingburg, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollis, Eric Alenia, John Connors, Philip Forrest Connolly, Dan Demetri, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Phil Kavanagh, Michael Stormir, Samuel André, Francis Ford, Tiago Nunes, Fergal Costa, Hal Herzog, Nuno Machado, Jonathan Labyrinth, João Linhares, Stantantia, Samuel Correia, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, João Eira, Tom Hummel, Sardas France, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Dez Araújo, Romain Roach, Diego Londoño Correia, Yannick Punter, Dana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavlo Stasevski, Nelek Bach, Guy Madison, Gary G. Allman, Sam Afzal, Adrian Yeager, Paul Tolentino, João Barbosa, Julian Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Douglas Fry, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Ponce Cortez, Ursula Litsky, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, Sonny Smith, John Wiseman, Daniel Friedman, William Buckner, Paul George Arnaud, Luke Loaki, Georgios Theophanes, Chris Williamson, Peter Wolozin, David Williams, Diogo Costa, Anton Erickson, Charles Murray, Alex Shaw, Maury Martinez, Coralie Chevalier, Bangalore Atheists, Larry Dealey Jr., Old Erringbon, Sterry, Michael Bailey, Dan Sperber, Robert Grassi, Igor N., Jeff McMahon, Jake Zool, Barnabas Radix, Mark Campbell, Thomas Dovner, Luke Nissen, Chris Story, Kimberly Johnson, Benjamin Galbert, Jessica Nowicki, Linda Brandon, Nicholas Carlson, Ismael Benzliman, George Coriatis, Valentin Steinman, Per Crowley, Kate Van Goller, Alexander Hubbard, Liam Dunaway, BR, Masood Ali Mohammadi, Perpendicular, Jonas Hertner, Ursula Goodenough, Gregory Hastings, David Pinsoff, Sean Nelson, Mike Lavigne, and Dios Necht. A special thanks to my producers, Isar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Tom Vanagdam, Bernard Ugnik, Curtis Dixon, Benedict Mueller, Thomas Trumbull, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, John Carlo Montenegro, Alnick Ortiz, and Nick Golden, and to my executive producers, Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, Bogdan Kanivets, and Rosie. Thank you for all.